Got it. Yeah, should be good. And that's it. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm assuming you're calling from Toronto, right? Is that where you call home?
Oh, yes, I wish I have not landed at my employer's job site due to kind of movement in the pandemic over time. Uh, so, yes, I'm still reporting live from the state that granted my PhD through its public university, the beautiful state of Colorado, USA. And I
Okay.
work remotely for an amazing team at the Institute for Gender and the Economy, run by Sarah Kaplan over at University of Toronto, at the
Oh,
business school, the Rotman School of Management.
yeah. I love Colorado. You guys have so many attractions for tourists, but also the social element means a great place to be during a pandemic. I mean, I'm in Switzerland. It's kind of a mini Colorado of sorts. From a
Oh,
mountain.
very much. Yeah. And we would call ourselves the Switzerland of the USA, right?
There you go. And the your background is great for teenagers because, well, first you're into academia big time, right? So it'd be great to hear that story. I love the United Nations T-shirt, so maybe we can hear that story.
Yes.
Yeah.
I figure for this audience, this will be relevant. Not maybe appropriate dress. I probably should have a tie on, but
That's so good. It's very relaxed. So, if you could tell us more about your wisdom stories and the things you learned during your journey that I think would be helpful to your younger self, right? And others in Asia around the world would be awesome to hear. So, thank you so much for being here. And the screen is all yours.
great. Thanks so much. I'm glad to join you all and always happy to join any of the WEF communities. I was part of the startup cohort for the Global Shapers community in Washington, D.C., part of our initial focus on kind of local education issues in the Washington, D.C. city hub. And I've always enjoyed bumping into WEFers abroad, including while I was on assignment working the peace process in Cyprus when a very significant WEF contributor and a minister in government now, Espen Barth Eide, was working on the peace process for the United Nations. So glad to be with you. Favorite group of folks. Love you all and love chances to engage. Wisdom stories. So this is a challenging narrative for me because as a social scientist now, formerly diplomat, but a social scientist now, I'm a bit suspicious that a single human, the sages, actually are aware in their memory of what was the behavior that helped them and what was the behavior that hurt them, right? So as a person who studies humans at workplaces, I find from the sages who are researchers from previous bodies of research work that humans are bad at figuring out what their own strengths really are, right? So we have a self-awareness problem. But I think I found a way around it for today's wisdom stories. I think these have some broad applicability with the same basic lesson, which is to stay curious about how things are working. That seems to be a safe lesson, even if I don't exactly know how it is that I got the jobs that I got at every step of the way, right, in the career. So the first story I have is a story that is related to my t-shirt. So I am wearing the UN blue color with the UN seal. But if you had the ability to see me, you would know that the t-shirt has a specific United Nations mission on it. It's UNTAID, the United Nations mission in Timor-Leste or East Timor. So back when I was a second year university student, I applied to my government, the United States government, for a a lot of money, for money to study overseas, to study in a foreign country. They had an option to design your own study abroad program, or to do one of their typical already funded programs, so long as you were learning a key language, and Bahasa Indonesia was a key language designated by the United States government. So it was appropriate for me to get government money to go learn about the post-war reconstruction process in Timor-Leste, in Dili, where I spent June to December of 2003. I learned in that internship the importance of being curious about how people use language. So here's the setting. I had an office job in the capital city of Timor-Leste, a country that was recovering from its war of separation from Indonesia. I walked into that job. I did not have prior experience working for development banks or economic development agencies or foreign aid agencies. This is the first time I was working in that environment. And the job I was at was in an internship at the World Bank Trust Fund for East Timor. I was immediately curious the variety of ways that World Bank officials use the word capacity. And all of the definitions of that word were brand new to me. And it was extremely important that I learned the definitions. So my first sort of wisdom lesson here for this wisdom group is that even if you speak the language of business of an organization, you might not actually know the many definitions of the words being spoken, right? So the word capacity in development economics sometimes is used as to describe the amount of money that a country can absorb, right, into its budget. So this was relevant for Timor-Leste because, hey, it's not a large country. And there were concerns that the more money that was spent by foreign governments, ostensibly to help Timorese people, might lead to, and frankly, it did lead to a rise in the cost of goods, or what the economists called inflation, right? So more foreigners come into the country, more foreigners bring in imports to the country. The local currency, for practical purpose, became the United States dollar. This place is a great deal far away from the United States of America. Although the intentions were very, very positive, these were very positive intentions, global people coming to Timor-Leste, coming to help after war, the people of Timor-Leste were still very concerned that the cost of groceries had increased, right? That food was becoming expensive, that motorcycle parts, and this is a country, I mean, almost has the culture, has sort of Vietnamese culture around motorcycles, right? Very important to have a motorcycle in Vietnam. Extremely important also to have a motorcycle in Timor-Leste, right? Rugged terrain, all, some similarities there. And if parts are going up because there's a whole lot of well-intended foreigners coming in who have high ability to pay, you're gonna have social problems, right? People do not like it if they can credibly blame a foreign person for their current hardship, right? That's a problem. That's a problem. So I learned the word capacity could mean absorptive capacity, the capacity of a small place to absorb a lot of money in circulation without making groceries and motorcycle parts too expensive for people who live in that country habitually, right? So that's definition number one of capacity. The second definition I learned was when a group visited from the training department of the World Bank to come to the mission in Timor-Leste and do training on office work skills. And for some reason, this training was referred to as capacity building. Again, I've never had this kind of office job. No one said the word capacity building to me before. I was confused. And in messages to my boss, I assumed that a visit for capacity building was somehow going to help deal with the absorptive capacity issues, the issues related to reducing inflation in a dollarized economy in an island in the southeast of the Asian continent, right? So I crossed those and had an embarrassing episode of memoranda that I wrote that made no sense, right? They were incomprehensible because I was confusing these two issues, right? So I would say that my advice to my former self would have been that if I had an inkling that I was unsure about what the hell people were talking about, what were the words coming out of other humans' mouths, then I should have taken the risk of feeling foolish by asking questions about the definition of these words. Capacity building means training. That capacity doesn't need to be built if the development community thinks you're already smart. Right? That they are building capacities when they think you're lacking a certain branch of knowledge, right? That's what they mean there. That I could have saved myself embarrassment over documents if I had had the courage to risk embarrassment in verbal conversation, right? So that's the first. And Marcelo, I know you're so good at drilling down and helping people communicate messages and communicate in ways that don't use too much jargon. So please do let me know if there's anything I can unpack a little bit from that first of a couple stories.
Oh, I guess you'll be surprised to know that I was in East Timor when the country was not even a week old in 2002.
Oh, wow. What a coincidence.
I spent a week there, and I guess I had plenty of wisdom stories that are worth sharing as well. And basically, what happens is I was flying around the world, one of those tickets that allow you to stop all over.
Oh, yes, the one purchase, but around the world ticket, right?
And you kind of get to pick where you want to stop. So it's a great way and very, I wouldn't say affordable because that's a relative term, but I had so many miles that it was not affordable. It was free, right? I literally just had to pay the tax on the
right.
And I was
Wonderful.
in South Korea, and my room, which is also on points because I had 1.3 million points with Hilton after a consulting project that lasted a year. So everything was kind of free, and I'm flying around the world and staying in 5-star hotels, so can't complain about working hard as a consultant.
Oh, that's fantastic.
A nice perk. So I didn't get US government money, but I was compensated for the 16-hour workdays a few months after the fact. So I am in a hotel room, 2002, so way back 20 years ago, effectively. And we had CNN, and because this is Korea, they had a desktop computer in every single room. That's the only time in my life I stayed in a hotel that actually had
never heard of that
in the room.
Yeah, yeah, I've never heard of that either.
Yeah, a luxury 2002, I guess that was a Korean definition. So I'm watching CNN, and then all of a sudden Bill Clinton pops on the screen. It's like, just landed in Delhi. I was like, say what? As in,
wow.
It was a severe war zone until quite recently. It's like, oh, it's a new country now. This is awesome. So happy for them. And I'm Brazilian. I have a Portuguese passport, and of course, East Timor has a Portuguese
right.
Ancestry. Let's just use a neutral word here. And I decided that I would fly from Korea to East Timor, and was sort of using that desktop computer until 4 or 5 in the morning, trying to figure out how to get there. They need a visa. What are the possibilities once you're on the ground? it turns out that there were no visa procedures because United Nations had been running the place. So once I got there, I had the UN stamp on my passport, which is quite unique.
Oh, from the time when the UN was the effective government,
Yeah.
from the transitional administration time.
So
It's
I got
another
there
Brazilian, Sergio Vieira de Mello, at the helm
exactly,
at the time, right?
and his son is my co-founder. So
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
I almost met Sergio in Dili.
Uh-huh.
Literally, I was going to walk up to the presidential palace, knock on the door, and ask him out for a beer because we're both from Rio. But
Uh-huh.
he had left 3 days before, right? So I got there 6 days after. I think he actually left a day or two after the inauguration ceremony, and I
I
got to
see.
meet his son after, of course, the incident in Baghdad, because I was giving a
Yes.
talk on refugee connectivity in Geneva, and the son was in the audience. And when I started talking about bringing Wi-Fi to refugee camps, it was like, well, my dad would have appreciated that. And I'm like, I almost met your dad on the other side of the planet, and he's still a very
Hmm.
good friend, and he is the co-founder of broadlights.org, which is my first nonprofit, and which is the nonprofit that is very, very active right now, trying to bring Wi-Fi to hospitals in Ukraine. So it's
Wow, wow. Oh, well, I'm so glad that there's a sort of a family tradition, a legacy being carried forward with with international work
yeah,
in that spirit.
it's an amazing story, and it's almost one of those pay attention to what the universe is telling you, if you believe in that or not, if you have this spiritual angle, religious, whatever you want to call it. But basically, I found out that his dad went to a school in Rio, which I almost attended, ended up going to another one, but I did interview for that school. We went to the same university, did not study the same topics, and
Hmm.
we spoke the same languages fluently, right? So
Oh, wow. Even the ones not from home.
yeah, so he was a diplomat, and I learned the languages by traveling and living in different places. But just
Uh-huh.
this crazy coincidence that they happen to be exactly the same languages. So there is a bond of sorts. And I usually joke saying that his son is my brother from another father. No,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
but
Yeah, no, that's
that was my 2 cents, and happy to continue to listen to your wisdom stories. But was very surprised when I said you're
yeah.
the Odontite, because I know I spent a whole week going all around the country, so I know the country relatively well. I think not,
Yeah, yeah.
but
And and I think I was there just as UNTIAD had given way to UNMISET, the mission of support for East Timor. So actually getting the shirts actually keep it generic as United Nations East Timor, even though the formal missions were changing. It's great that you brought up Sergio Vieira de Mello, because there's actually a story that I think is a great bridge. It is hearsay, but I believe it because of the sources involved. That is actually a great bridge to positive work on diversity and inclusion, which is the topic of my social science research these days, my second career. So just to go back to some of the history you recap, Sergio Vieira de Mello was in charge of a United Nations mission in Timor-Leste that was effectively the temporary government of East Timor. That was the job. War was over. There had been a referendum. Timor had separated from Indonesia. And so now there was a small period of time where the United Nations would be in charge of just doing government work, because you needed a little bit of time before you could print the ballots for an election and for political parties to, they existed, but they needed to have a chance to campaign and compete for people's votes. So there was a temporary time where some experienced United Nations diplomats became, prime minister, for, all these ministerial roles, basically. And diversity was a hot topic among international staff, specifically regarding your sex, right? The lack of women serving in United Nations missions. So how did I get access to the information? I became mentored by a group of daring women economists in Timor-Leste. There's a set of them that traveled around the world doing economic assessments of disasters. They refer to themselves as the WBBs, the World Bank Bees. I will not say that word. Being a man living a man's life, I do not feel that I have the privilege to sort of invoke the joyful use of a slur for women, which is the B word, right? So the World Bank Bees was the informal name of a group of very, brave, experienced economists who work on disaster assessment and post-disaster economic planning. So they had been to Aceh and Timor-Leste. They had been to, many, many countries with large scale economic disasters, usually, influenced by weather, but sometimes by war as well. So what did I learn from the World Bank Bees, this group? They attended meetings chaired by Sergio Vieira de Mello, and he received a report from his deputy mission chief, a Frenchman. He reportedly asked his deputy, the diplomat who was in charge of human resources, why don't we have any women on our staff, or certainly not very many people in the United Nations foreign staff? I'm going to do a terrible French accent. Apparently the deputy said, well, Mr. SRSG, this work is so hard. The women, they cope with these conditions. The living conditions are very hard. Everything is so hard. We cannot find the women. Sergio de Mello apparently gestures to the part of the meeting room where the World Bank delegation was seated and said, well, the World Bank found 6 women. Of course, simply bringing to light the absurdity of this idea that it is simply impossible to recruit women to do difficult jobs, right? Apparently, this caused a normally very quiet and proper United Nations cluster meeting to erupt in laughter. That Mr. de Mello apparently had a very good way, a dry way of communicating absurdity, is what I learned from this group about diversity efforts that actually had not even begun, right? So that's my one link between the senior de Mello and diversity and inclusion in staffing and hiring.
And there are 2 movies on Netflix about him. One is the
2. My goodness! Wow.
Came out. So the fiction just came out, I believe, last year, but there was a documentary that was released a few years back, and because of the fiction, it became available again. So if you want to see images of Dili,
sure.
and maybe learn a few things that have been disclosed now that are not available by the time we were both on there. Well, which year did it go to Dili? Is that 2003, 4?
It was 2003, yes.
Yeah.
So from June till December. So I took one term. We had trimesters in my undergrad. I took one term off from school and combined it with the summer vacation to try to have a 6-month internship to learn as much as I could. And then when I got back to my university, we created a fellowship that linked, future undergraduates getting some experience at that World Bank office in Timor-Leste.
That's great. So Vic, if you could tell us a bit more about your sense of purpose in going into a postdoc, because this is really hard work, right? You need to be very specific. You have politics as well. People don't realize in academia, publish or perish is a thing. You have to kind of use your elbows gently or not so gently in some cases, from what I've told. Could you tell us more about the struggles and how did you get there? Is that one of those things that once you decide you climbing a mountain, you don't care if it's Everest, you're going to make it there? Or what was your experience?
Oh, wow. Yes. So look, and this is tough for me, right? Because I don't know that I know exactly what got me through, but I can talk about things that I saw, and hope that it's useful for others who are considering a life in academia. For me, a second career, this is brand new. I don't have relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities about how to manage the career. So going in without knowledge that academia has politics, but with some experience navigating bureaucracy in my past, right? Some experience navigating committee-based decisions, right? Decisions that are taken as groups as opposed to decisions executed by a single director. So I had some relevant, perhaps transferable knowledge about those kinds of experiences. I found the 5 years of the doctoral process very challenging. And here's what I think helped, just hypotheses. Number one, we have to remember that although the stated purpose of academic work is to make new discoveries that build upon or test and reject our prior discoveries, this mission to do new things still is being carried out by flawed human beings. That is, that although the very mission of academic work is to innovate, we also know from scholars who study innovation that innovation annoys the hell out of everybody. I don't know if that translates exactly across multiple languages, but I'll say that sometimes new ideas expressed by newly arriving people like me who do not have a background in academia, that hearing these new ideas from a new person can annoy people. It just is. It just is. It's one of the most confusing things about research on innovation, is that the innovators kind of make other people nervous. It's just a normal part of how humans react to new things that show up in their organizations. So, but what did I have in my advantage? I had, on a faculty of what, let's say there's 20 faculty, a key advantage that I had is I had two advisors, David and Stephanie, who just loved talking about new ideas. They had a high level of what we call need for cognition. They really liked difficult puzzles regarding some of the diversity and inclusion questions I was grappling with. And no matter what, these two people defended my autonomy to explore the questions I wanted to explore. They helped me craft a defense of the methodologies I chose. It's very controversial to mix together interview-based, person-to-person interviews with quantifiable, quantitative hypothesis testing. Each research method is considered valid by separate research communities. There are qualitative scholars and there are quantitative scholars. And when one decides to blend them in the same studies, you reach a point of skepticism with some audiences, right? If you blend them, then the qualitative people say, oh, is that really good qualitative? If they needed to buttress it with quantitative work. And the really, quantitative only people might say, oh, is this quantitative work strong enough to stand on its own? This guy included a lot of interview quotes, right, that are superfluous in their quantitative judgment. They're like, give me the valid scale without any introduction. And as part of my research ethics, I'm very committed to responsible management research methods that honestly tell the story of where your survey scale came from. I'm going to explicitly talk about the context of its development. I'm going to explicitly talk about the quotes that I stole from my interviewees and put into a survey scale and rigorously tested the validity of that with quantitative testing methods. And I had in my defense two people who at least look to the world to be white Americans. People wouldn't guess they have some additional complexity in their ethnic backgrounds, but who are well regarded by their 20 or so colleagues, and who constantly advanced and defended my career, defended my research autonomy, defended my choice of research method. And when I got some negative feedback, consistently helped me distinguish which pieces of the feedback were valid critiques and which pieces were kind of BS stuff that they've never seen given to their previous advisees who had a different ethnicity than I did. Right. So they were just very helpful at separating ridiculous critique from valid, helpful criticism that helps me as a new scholar, helps me to grow from baby doctor, hopefully, into one day an actual tenure line professor of management. So I learned that having a couple allies who are already legitimate among their colleagues is extremely helpful. Determination by itself is not sufficient, I believe, because without those two people, I imagine a scenario where I did not have those two senior level allies. I think the most efficient decision would have been for me to exit the doctoral program prematurely and to perhaps enroll at a more supportive, inclusive doctoral program, right? That would have been the logical move if I had lacked powerful allies who were willing to hear new ideas and new methods to credibly research those ideas.
So make friends and influence people and get the support you need. It's a lesson that teenagers can benefit from, because those lessons tend to be quite painful, right? It's just so when you fail that you realize, wow, I should have done that, but now it's too late. So Vic, that's great. And this is, as I mentioned, a very special session, made more special by the fact that you actually went to East Timor. So
yeah, I'm so glad we have that in common.
Yeah, I'll send you some stuff. I mean, I lost all the pictures. I had one of those old cards that were very thin, so it kind of broke into my wallet. It was,
oh no,
every single picture I had from Timor was lost, but I still have wonderful memories.
Marcelo, I will share my Dropbox of my Timor-Leste photos. Oh, I have such good memories from Timor.
It will be
challenging time, but
very much appreciated. And it is a tropical paradise, right? If you just forget a few details around it.
So beautiful. Oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. Yes, I mean, it feels, I think you have this experience too, where even a hard day of work in a global profession has its perks, right? So at the end of the day, I remember spending a lot of time doing logistics as the intern, right? You do all of the low-level logistics for a very major meeting. People were flying from capital cities of big donor companies for the Timor-Leste and Development Partners meeting, which is a nice way to say the donor meeting, right? Foreign governments sign a check, they give some money, they give some cars, they give some equipment, some of it useful, some of it not. And then they have to have a meeting about how the budget works. So I was doing all the details for this. And it was exhausting, right? I was exhausted in my body after all of the preparations for this big annual meeting. And yet it was lovely. I exited the office after that meeting. I just crossed that main road, right? The main road near the coast, right? Up front with all the fancy buildings. And you go to the coconut guy. He comes down, he gets the coconut ready. And then your only question after a hard day's work is rum or no rum.
Yeah, I was staying at the ship.
Oh, yes, the
It
ship was still there.
Yeah, ship from Thailand that was in Myanmar before. It was basically sailing to all the trouble zones in Asia,
Right.
and ended up in Timor. And when I got to Dili, actually before, so I flew from Seoul to Hong Kong to Singapore, Singapore to Bali, then Bali to Dili. It was really not
Right.
And in Singapore, I went to a secondhand bookstore that had a guidebook from the 1980s. No, yeah, 1990s, right?
Wow.
Before the troubles started. And I managed to write down the name of a few hotels in Dili, even though they had all sorts of warnings saying, look, this is basically occupied territory, you know, in case you insist, yeah, Indonesia will let you in. So I managed to find a hotel. And I do recall that I had to write it down because my phone didn't have a camera back then, like 2002. Phones did not have cameras.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And when I got
the first iPhone came out, and I was a master student to give a sense of how sage I am.
You know, when I got to the hotel, in fact, I landed and tried to rent a car, and of course, Avis, Hertz, they're not there, and managed to figure out there was this very, very dodgy Australian guy who was renting Japanese cars, and people were saying, yeah, we just don't know where the cars are coming from, but hey, you know, they are available. And I was there renting a car, a Mitsubishi, which was so old and so bad that I called it a Mitsushitty. And that's how I drove for a week in the whole country.
Oh my goodness.
The hotel, they only had one room because there's so many foreign volunteers and staff members of different entities there. The hotel room literally had the bullet holes on the walls and was partially burned. Mm-hmm. And they said it was $100 a night. It was like, well, I'll check the Thai ship, and there was also $100. So I stayed there the whole week, and it was a lot of fun, actually. So it's, I only have positive memories. Nothing bad ever happened in Timor, other than while I was driving my Mitsubishi all the way to the Christ statue.
Oh yes,
during
Cristo Rey.
Yeah. So basically, I'm driving, and the sun is on my face, so it's very hard to see the road until I had something telling me to stop. Saying, no, something is wrong. And what was wrong is that the road was missing. Like some Indonesian torpedo bomb, whatever, had destroyed part of the road, and I was about to drive into a cliff. And no one bothered putting some branches just to say, hey, no more road, assuming people from there would all know. But I had just arrived, and the sun happened to be blinding me, right? So obviously a very visual thing when there's no road in front of you, but then you cannot see.
And visuals are gone, yeah.
So that's the only thing that could have been, it would have been a bad day, you know, driving into a 20 meters deep cliff. But
a drop. Oh my gosh. And the drops are, I mean, the geography of Timor-Leste is beautiful and dramatic. I mean, very dramatic. I was astounded by how much linguistic diversity there is in such a small, you know, the total space is not very large, but because of the geography, there's actually quite a lot of separation
Yeah.
between several of the settlements, right? Several of the cities, several of the towns. So it is quite interesting. I'm glad that I got to see so much of the country in a tiny amount of time, but to hear the differences between Manatuto and Okusi, right? I mean, it's dramatically diverse for a small, a place that on a map, right, on a flat rendering in 2 dimensions doesn't look as
Oh,
big as it
it's tiny.
feels gigantic when you're in Timor-Leste. The place feels diverse and gigantic and complex, um, in a way that I think maps do not tell the whole story.
Yeah, it's great that you've been there. I love to have access to your pictures because I lost all mine. And last story I'll share, because I have to go back to the Ukrainian efforts. The way that I ended up connecting with some expats was meeting this Romanian, so talking about women here, expert from the Minister of Finance, who was helping the government set up procedures and protocols. And she told me that there was, I think she was the one telling me about the ship, right? Oh, you could also stay there. And when I go there, I met the reception, and there's this guy speaking with a very heavy Portuguese accent, full of tattoos, right? Clearly,
Huh.
someone with a very unique personality. And
Uh-huh.
he was unique indeed. He was this homicidal psychopath who became
Whoa, not where I thought that was going, Marcel.
the. And the funny thing is that that guy became my dive buddy. The first time
What?
I went diving, homicidal psychopath. So he was a mercenary working during the really hard times. I mean, I'm
Oh
not
my
joking.
gosh.
Homicidal because his job was to kill people, and psychopath
Oh
because
my
spend more than 5 minutes
God.
with him. Yeah. So
Wow. So he had the killer instinct, and the whole idea is, can we channel that into productive security positions?
yeah, well, he was hired, like that was his job, right? So he was fighting on the side of
Wow.
the Timorese, and he told me lots of stories. I do recall quite a few. Took me to one of those most amazing diving sites I've ever seen in my whole life. I mean, Timor is pristine, absolutely incredible. And the funny thing is that when I started speaking to him in Portuguese, it sort of got a bit worried, as in, who are you and why you're talking to me, kind of thing.
Oh.
And then very quickly he realized, okay, because I told him that I was a tourist in Timor. It's like, no one comes here as a tourist. I mean,
Ah. So he was immediately, this is the OPSEC mentality, operational security. Is Marcelo a threat or is he not a threat
yeah, exactly.
idea?
And,
Okay.
and I'm doing the same, right? So I'm trying to figure out who's this person. And then he was the one telling me that he was a great idea to stay at the ship because they had violence sometimes erupting. And a week after I left, they threw a firebomb at the house of the prime minister, as in he was unstable
Yes.
back
Yes. Prime
then.
Minister Alcantara. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he basically said, no, with the ship, they just raise a plank and you're okay here. And he also told me that, as I mentioned, that I grew up in Rio. I mean, he could tell from my accent.
Right.
He said that the Portuguese
Was he
battalion.
from Rio too? Or was
He
that
was
not
from
a
Portugal. No, he
okay.
was
Okay.
very much Portuguese. So I
Okay.
I started talking to him because his accents in English was so heavy, and
Okay.
and he told me, "Oh, you're from Rio. We have a battalion here, so around 400 soldiers from Portugal. They stay in the capital because lots
Yeah.
of people in the countryside, they still don't like the Portuguese from the colonial days.
Right.
But there's also a Brazilian platoon, and they're the ones controlling the border because everybody loves the Brazilians, right? You can speak in
Yeah.
Portuguese to
Yeah.
them.
Oh my
There's
gosh. Yeah.
no bad
And
blood.
Timorese are, like much of the world, I mean, they love a pickup game of football.
Absolutely.
And
But
the Brazilian soldiers had the reputation of really building rapport through sport. I mean, they used their off duty time in a way that helped keep the level of understanding and appreciation with the local community very high.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I witnessed that because the Portuguese mercenary told me that there was a samba night at the battalion organized by the
Yes.
Brazilian platoon because he was Saturday.
Yes.
And then he also told me that the expats used to meet at the specific bar. So I go to that bar. So this guy gave me all the local intelligence I needed to have an amazing experience, right? And
That's wonderful.
I met, but I got to this bar and there was a table with 4 girls. Everybody else was a man, half of them soldiers, the other officers.
Right.
And they were speaking Portuguese. I literally just went to the table and introduced myself and ended up staying at their place at some point in time. They were the ones taking me to the battalion.
I see. Okay. So they made introductions with
Yeah,
co-lingual
it
folks.
happens so fast because
Yes.
it's such a unique situation, right? People are willing to help. People are like, well, I understand why you're asking the question. I will be asking the same, and I'm happy to help because I do have the answers. So it was
Right.
kind of a turbo human experience where emotions were very intense. Everything is new. It's just like absolutely fantastic, right? So we can say that hey, traveling is good for your soul, but so these kind of highly memorable experiences are even better because even now, 20 years later, it's very fresh in my memory. You know, I recall vivid details. But Vic,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
really great to have you here. I will send you some stuff that I have about Timor. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
I look
giving
forward
us
to it.
time.
Glad to.